Here are the players that are about to go absolutely nuclear in fantasy football that aren't the top studs that everybody talks about that are impossible to trade for, as well as some players that are ticking time bombs mixed into this video you want to get off your roster as soon as possible. The first player here we have to be buying low on is going to be Jacoby Myers, and this one is very, very real and underrated for what he is. But as we get into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're reaching a ton of new people. I would love to give you guys a statistical advantage in fantasy that nobody else is going to give you, and like the video as well if you do appreciate it and want some good luck in fantasy football. But as for Jacoby Myers, let's dive into these numbers. In week 3, he scored 21.2 fantasy points against a terrible Panthers defense, all considered. In week 4, he led all receivers and tight ends, every single receiving option possible in the NFL in target percentage with a 41.7 target share against a pretty good Browns secondary. Then coming off an ankle injury in week 5, still played and was shadowed by Patrick Surtain on 50% of his routes, still finished with 6 receptions for 72 yards and 9 targets. In week 6 and 7, he was out with that injury, and then last week he comes back against the literal toughest matchup in the entire NFL against the Chiefs. -8 adjusted fantasy points per game to outside wide receivers inefficiency allowed, and he still scored 17.2 fantasy points. So if you gather all the data of those games and the ones without Devontae Adams, which I did, he averages a 20.8 team target share without him, and Brock Bowers is at 21.4. So it's not that big of a difference, and he's still a very capable wide receiver in this offense. But most people just see the wide receiver 30 mark, and the Raiders offense isn't that good. That's why you have to look deeper into these numbers. And with Adams gone, there's really nobody else to take usage from him at the wide receiver position. He does get some very tough matchups coming in a bye week in week 10, so be aware of that. But his fantasy football playoff schedule is one of the best, if not the easiest. But looking into a player we need to sell high, it is Diontae Johnson. And look, I know this is a pretty hot take considering he just went to the Ravens, a better offense with a better quarterback, probably the best he's ever played with, and I am aware of that. But that's the reason he's in this video. If we look at the statistics and strengths of Diontae Johnson through his career, regardless of the team that he's been on, it has been his route running ability and the volume that comes from that separation. In 2020, he was the wide receiver 22, averaging 9.6 targets a game. In 2021, the wide receiver 9 with 10.6 targets a game. Then this year, he's the wide receiver 14 in isolated games with Andy Dalton on 10.8 targets per game. And the reason I use the isolated numbers with Andy Dalton is to make this point even more clear. I'm taking his best games here, and if you look at his route tree from 2022, almost every single route type, he had a 75% success rate or more. For example, 88.3% success rate on curl routes, 87.5% on comeback routes, 83.3% on flat routes, slants, corners. I could keep going. So you see all of that success. Now you have to take into account that he's on the Ravens now, a team that ranks 30th in pass rate, and Lamar is averaging 29 passing attempts a game. And now they already have Flowers on that team. You look at him, his play style is almost the complete opposite of what Diontae Johnson is. He's first in the NFL in designed targets per game. He's 7th in yards after the catch, a great deep ball threat. Diontae Johnson, 51st in yards after the catch, and a 50% win rate on vertical routes. So if Diontae Johnson keeps on his absolute peak of targets from his career with a 25% team target share, with Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in that scheme, that's only 7 targets a game. At his very peak at a 25% target share, which is almost likely not going to happen. Again, you see an issue here with Diontae Johnson in the fit with the Ravens. Lamar is top 3 in every passing stat against zone coverage, but against a man, he's into the average of every NFL quarterback. Diontae Johnson's strength comes in separation and running routes against man. That's not Lamar's strength in the NFL. So you put all of these things together on top of the fact that in 5 years, the best wide receiver Lamar has ever supported was the wide receiver 25. He's never really been able to support a number 2 wide receiver consistently. The Ravens have a really, really tough rest of season schedule. The second worst 2 wide receivers for the rest of the year and the 7th worst fantasy football playoff schedule. And they already have Flowers, and they have an amazing run game with Derrick Henry that's not going to be abandoned. The opportunities for Diontae Johnson are just really low. Is he going to be a bust? No, absolutely not. But a lot of people are putting a bit too much hype on his name because he's going to the Ravens and a good offense. But you have to look more into the fit. You see Devontae Adams with the Raiders, or even now with the Jets. The fit is what's the problem. You see it in NBA all the time. They sign a bunch of superstars, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, all these players on the Suns. They can't win because the fit isn't right. And that's kind of what I see here with Diontae Johnson. People will give you a ton of value for him right now because, again, he was averaging 10.8 targets a game with Andy Dalton and has been pretty decent over the years. But moving into the next buy low candidate, that's actually going to be Kenneth Walker. I know it's kind of surprising. He's coming off his worst game of the year at 8.5 fantasy points against the Bills his first game all season where he went under double-digit fantasy points. So you might be asking, he's the RB9 right now. How exactly is he a buy low candidate? But you look into his game log and it's not exactly all green. The rushing volume and consistency just hasn't really been there. Now he has a tougher matchup against the Rams this week and then a bye week following that in week 10. The managers of Kenneth Walker are going to be a little bit more susceptible to trading him and looking for offers off of his team. And I've been seeing the comments. A lot of people are asking me trade questions and Kenneth Walker is in those deals. People are selling him for way less than what he should actually be going for. If you guys have specific trade questions, make sure to drop them in the comments. I try to get to every single one possible, but the underlying numbers for Kenneth Walker is absolutely insane. This guy's the RB7 on the year in missed tackles forced per game. He's the RB6 in target share on the year with 14.1%. But he's the RB3 in total targets and the RB2 in routes run per game. The only reason that his target share is low is because Geno Smith is the #1 most pass-heavy quarterback in the entire NFL. And you look at his numbers, he's been absolutely amazing in the pass game. When they're up, when they're down, he runs routes, and he has the red zone with his name written all over it. The Seahawks have been in very negative run scripts for the past few weeks, which is why they're #1 in passing attempts. But when they are controlling games, in the small chances of time that we've seen it, they absolutely run Kenneth Walker to the ground. And even in preseason, they were saying that he is a 3-down running back they want to utilize. But moving into another running back, we're going to be selling high. Maybe you can package him with somebody else to get a Kenneth Walker. Is going to be J.K. Dobbins. I would definitely look for offers for him. Dobbins in the first 2 games, absolutely amazing. He broke out for 22.9 fantasy points and 20 fantasy points and finished with 9.8 yards per carry, which is first in the NFL in those first 2 weeks, as well as a .33 missed tackles forced per attempt that was also first in the NFL, and 3 yards after contact that ranked 8th in the NFL. Amazing numbers all around. In those first 2 games though, it was against the Raiders and the Panthers, 2 of the top 5 teams in points given up and allowed to running backs this year. And then you look at the last 5 games, it starts showing a different story. 3.1 yards per carry, that ranks 51st. 0.11 missed tackles forced per attempt, that ranks 45th. And 1.9 yards after contact, that ranks 49th. Now, I'm not saying that he is washed and a complete bust. We need to get him off our roster for absolute pennies. But we do have Gus Edwards coming back from IR in week 10, and we have Kamani Vidal playing very efficient on the low number of snaps that he does get. So this backfield is going to get a little messy pretty soon. And on top of that, the Chargers have one of the toughest rest of season schedules for running backs, facing the Browns, followed by the Titans, Bengals, Ravens, Falcons, and Chiefs. That is ugly. He's the RB18 right now, and he has been on a decline as far as efficiency goes, and the fantasy points per game are still kind of in the same realm, so most people don't see him as a sell high candidate, but I would be tempering my expectations for him moving forward, or at least his efficiency, because his opportunities probably won't decrease by that much. Again, unless he gets injured, and we know J.K. Dobbins does have an injury history like Gus Edwards as well. You can't trade these people just based on injury though, but there is always that chance. And he's not necessarily on the best offense either, which gives you a ton of upside because they're 23rd in rushing yards while being 19th in rushing attempts and 31st in red zone efficiency. Their passing statistics are even worse than that. So it's not necessarily an offense I want to be buying in on. But now we're going to be looking at a player we need to be buying low. Amari Cooper is that name. He has value written all over him. You look at how he started the season. He wasn't great. I'll get into that in a second. But with the Bills in his first 2 games, he's the wide receiver 101 in targets per game. But he played 35 and 50% of the snaps in the first 2 weeks. So you can't look at this target number and his efficiency as far as fantasy points go and say, okay, well, this isn't somebody we want to be getting because he's barely playing snaps. He's not even on the field. But it's just common sense. The Bills did not sign him and trade for him to run 50% of the routes. This is Amari Cooper we're talking about. That number is eventually going to go up, and his efficiency and usage will continue to follow that trend. But it's the fantasy points that's keeping his value low. Even if we look at all the statistics from the Browns with his entire season numbers, he's a wide receiver 35, averaging 9.5 fantasy points a game. Now, none of that matters. We have to throw all of those statistics away because now he's on a new team with a new system with the Bills. But people will look at that number and will automatically assume subconsciously that he has a little bit less value. Because imagine if he was on the Browns and he's the wide receiver 5 on the year, and now he goes to the Bills and starts a little bit lower, his value is just going to be through the roof because people are expecting a high return. But now he comes to a way better Bills offense that ranks 3rd in red zone efficiency and very high pass volume when given the opportunity. Josh Allen just hasn't been able to do that because his wide receivers have not been efficient. In week 7, his first game with the Bills, he only ran 12 routes, but he saw a target on 5 of those routes. In week 8, he was 2nd on the team in routes last week, despite only playing 50% of the snaps. It's a guarantee. These numbers are going to come up. He's going to be more efficient. He's a red zone target as well. Very quickly, though, a trade target we want to be getting away off of our team is going to be Kareem Hunt. And the main reason here is similar to that with Jordan Mason and why we were selling him a few weeks back. We have Pacheco returning in week 10 from IR, Is he going to come back, start a little bit slow? Most likely. It was a serious injury. But the closer we get to that return date for Pacheco, the lower and lower Kareem Hunt's value is going to be. You can get some real value for him right now because he's been absolutely amazing. Since his first start with the Chiefs, he's been the RB10 on the year in fantasy points per game. As a 29-year-old, he's been seeing great usage, 20 touches a game, but he just had a game against the Raiders where he saw 21 carries for 59 yards, 2.9 yards per carry. That's a little bit lower than usual. You're bound to have games where the efficiency really isn't there, but when you have a name like Kareem Hunt and a guy that really has no inherent value, those down games are going to tank his value way more than it would with a Breece Hall or a Bijan Robinson having a down game because they have value attached to their name. So if any of that continues in the next week or even possibly from this week, people seeing that, he's going to take a bigger hit than you'd want. So I would look for trade options to get him off my team before the hype of Pacheco coming back starts because the Chiefs just got DeAndre Hopkins. The offense is going to look a little bit better soon. So I'd sell him for a guy like Nick Chubb, a player that we should be buying low on and look at some statistics for. And there were a lot of concerns for him coming into this year. In the beginning of the season, even now almost, a 28-year-old running back coming off a very, very serious injury, probably the worst I've ever seen, competing in a backfield with Jerome Ford. Now they have Deshaun Watson on the team taking a bunch of rushing usage. Well, now Deshaun Watson's out for the year, and that honestly does help him in being more efficient. He's going to allow the touchdown and red zone upside to go to the running backs and not being ran in by Deshaun Watson, so it gives him more value in that sense. And also, rushing quarterbacks statistically take it themselves instead of throwing the check down to the running backs, which would give them more fantasy points as well. But after watching only 2 weeks of Nick Chubb play football, I'm pretty bought in on him, even without his snap share not being the highest on what you want it to be. And if you're going to take a shot like this, you have to do it before one big game happens. Again, because his name is Nick Chubb, the second he has a good game, you're not going to be able to get him for pretty low. And if you look at his game log, 11 carries, 22 yards in his first game back, 16 carries, 52 yards last week on 36 and 61% of the snaps. It's not a surprise that he's starting low, but he had 78% of the running back touches and carries in his second week back from a huge injury, leading the backfield in routes run last week as well. The numbers are trending in the right direction. His involvement will increase as he gets more healthy. He's going to get up to an 80% snap share. It's almost guaranteed. And with Jameis Winston helping this offense even a little bit in efficiency, he's going to be that much more valuable. But that is going to finish off this video of the buy low and sell high targets. I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you in the next one coming soon with all of the running back and wide receiver rankings of the week.